The phones were ringing nonstop inside Bombay's banking district. Traders were screaming into landlines, and somewhere deep inside the State Bank of India, a clerk was staring at a piece of paper that was never supposed to exist. Billions of rupees were moving through the system at lightning speed. Stock prices were exploding like fireworks. And one man was smiling calmly behind oversized glasses, fully aware that the entire financial system was dancing to his tune. Before we go any further, tell me where you are watching from right now, because this story touches every country that believes markets are fair. And if you love scam stories where the truth is darker than fiction, subscribe to ScamSphere right now, because what you are about to hear only gets more insane from here. One crucial detail about how this empire actually collapsed is coming later. And once you hear it, you will never look at the stock market the same way again. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, India's stock market was not a place of quiet analysis or long-term investing. It was a battlefield of rumors, paper slips, delayed settlements, and blind trust. The Bombay Stock Exchange ran on human voices, hand signals, and handwritten deals. There were no instant digital audits, no real-time oversight, and definitely no suspicion that someone could hijack the system from the inside. That environment was not just vulnerable, was begging to be exploited. Harshad Mehta understood this better than anyone else. Born into a modest Gujarati family, he was not raised among elites or groomed for finance. He started as a salesman and later worked as a clerk at a brokerage firm. That position gave him something more valuable than money: access. He learned how trades were settled, how banks communicated, and most importantly, how government securities were treated as sacred, unquestionable instruments of trust. That trust would become his weapon. The scam did not begin with stocks. That is the part most people misunderstand. It began inside banks with something called a bank receipt. In theory, a bank receipt was simple. One bank borrowed money from another and issued a receipt promising to deliver government securities later. These receipts were considered as good as gold. Nobody checked them closely. Nobody imagined they could be forged or misused. Harshad Mehta realized that if he could control these receipts, he could control the money flowing through the system. Using connections across multiple banks, including State Bank of India and National Housing Bank, fake or improperly issued bank receipts began circulating. These receipts unlocked massive short-term loans from banks that assumed everything was legitimate. Once the money was released, it did not sit idle. It rushed straight into the stock market. Suddenly, certain stocks began rising for no logical reason. He bought a sea-facing apartment worth crores, filled it with imported furniture, and drove luxury cars through streets where people still queued for ration supplies. The image mattered. Confidence mattered. In markets, perception becomes reality, and Harshad Mehta controlled perception like a master illusionist. But beneath the spectacle was a ticking bomb. The stock market boom was artificial, fueled not by company performance, but by stolen banking funds. Every time prices rose, Harshad used those gains to attract more money. Every time someone questioned him, he dazzled them with confidence and complexity. Regulators were either confused or complacent. Bank officials trusted paperwork more than logic. The system rewarded silence. What made the scam terrifying was not just its size, but its elegance. There were no masked hackers or midnight heists. This was fraud executed in daylight through official channels, with government banks unknowingly acting as accomplices. At its peak, the scam involved over 4,000 crore, an unimaginable figure for India at the time. The first crack came not from regulators, but from journalism. A financial journalist named Suketa Dalal noticed inconsistencies no one else wanted to see. She followed paper trails that led to missing securities and unexplained transactions. When her expose hit the headlines in April 1992, the illusion shattered overnight. The market collapsed like a building with its foundation removed. Prices crashed. Investors panicked. Banks realized they had lent billions against nothing. Harshad Mehta went from market messiah to national villain in a matter of days. The same cameras that once praised him now hunted him. Yet even as investigations began, one question remained unanswered. How did a single man manipulate the entire financial system without being stopped? The answer is darker than greed. It is about blind faith, weak oversight, and a system that assumed trust could replace verification. The Bombay Stock Exchange had become a battlefield littered with broken dreams, shattered rupees, and the echoes of a bull that had run too far, too fast. In the aftermath of the expose, the market was a scene of panic unlike anything India had ever seen. Brokers screamed into telephones that no longer seemed to work. Clients demanded their money back, and the stock tickers ran like wild horses with no reins. Billions of rupees, once imagined as wealth, evaporated into thin air into the pockets of the man who had orchestrated the largest financial illusion the country had ever witnessed. Yet the public at large still struggled to understand the scale. 4,000 crore was a number beyond comprehension, yet that was just the tip of the iceberg. And somewhere inside all this chaos, Harshad Mehta sat in his sprawling, sea-facing apartment, unshaken, calculating the next move with the detachment of a chess grandmaster. Banks, both public and private, discovered the magnitude of the loopholes they had ignored. Receipts meant to guarantee real government securities were worthless. Floating documents with no backing, signed and stamped as if they were divine decrees. The Reserve Bank of India, despite being the guardian of the system, could only watch as this engineered collapse unfolded. They began a frantic audit, tracing every flow of cash from the National Housing Bank, State Bank of India, and other financial institutions, only to realize that Harshad's manipulations were more sophisticated than anything imagined. Each step he took was precise. Every transaction was timed to exploit a blind spot. Fraud of this scale, in daylight, without a single hacker or illegal code, was unprecedented. Harshad had weaponized trust. Investors ranging from seasoned traders to middle-class families who had been inspired by the meteoric rise of certain stocks were left in financial ruin. People who had borrowed their life savings to buy shares of companies like ACC and Bombay dying were forced to watch the value of their portfolios collapse overnight. Stories emerged of families selling heirlooms to cover losses, young couples delaying weddings, and small entrepreneurs losing entire capital investments. The human cost of this scam, though rarely quantified in newspapers, was devastating. And yet, the man at the center of it all continued to maneuver with the arrogance of someone untouchable. Harshad Mehta's arrest in November 1992 did not produce immediate clarity. Cameras caught him entering courtrooms with his signature calm smile, now under the watchful gaze of law enforcement. Over 70 criminal cases were filed, spanning cheating, forgery, and criminal conspiracy. Courtrooms became theaters, and Harshad was the lead actor in a drama that gripped the nation. His defense hinged on exposing systemic flaws rather than admitting wrongdoing. "I exploited a system built to be exploited," he reportedly said. And for the first time, many began to question not only his guilt, but the integrity of the entire banking apparatus. Indeed, Harshad did not act alone. Officials had ignored regulations, colluded, or were too complacent to notice. Yet, he was the lightning rod, the symbol of betrayal. The investigative trail revealed intricate financial gymnastics that stunned even veteran accountants. Bank receipts had been reused multiple times. Money was channeled through multiple accounts before reaching the stock market. And the scale of misappropriation ballooned as Harshad leveraged every opportunity. The press detailed intricate tables showing how 500 crore vanished, then 1,000 crore, then more, with no physical evidence of securities. For a system that relied on trust over verification, the implications were chilling. Fraud had become a mathematical art form, and Harshad Mehta was its undisputed master. Meanwhile, the human element in these banks' clerks, junior officers, and mid-level managers faced their own dilemmas. Some had noticed irregularities, but feared reporting them. Some colluded, tempted by commission or the promise of advancement. Others remained silent, assuming that higher management understood better. When the truth finally emerged, it was like a dam bursting. Not only was Harshad exposed, but an entire culture of negligence and opportunism was laid bare. The collapse forced regulatory and structural reforms that reshaped Indian finance. The Securities and Exchange Board of India, previously powerless, was granted sweeping authority to monitor and intervene. Paper-based trading systems were replaced with electronic settlement systems to ensure transparency. Banks instituted stricter checks on interbank transactions, and auditing became mandatory. Ironically, Harshad Mehta's fraudulent genius became the blueprint for reform. The man who caused billions in losses inadvertently made the financial system more resilient, though at an enormous social and economic cost. As the years unfolded, Harshad's court cases dragged interminably. Every hearing revealed new details, forged documents, altered accounting entries, and confessions from officials who admitted to facilitating the scam under pressure or greed. The sheer complexity of the scheme made conviction difficult, yet public perception had already condemned him. In the media, he was both demonized and mythologized. The big bull became a figure representing the intersection of ambition, audacity, and systemic weakness. In 2001, before the conclusion of most of his cases, Harshad Mehta died in custody due to a heart attack at the age of 47. His death sparked debates across India. Some saw it as poetic justice, others as a failure of the system to fully confront its vulnerabilities. Many cases remained unresolved. Money was never fully recovered, and families of investors continue to live with the aftermath. Despite his criminal label, his story persisted as a lesson, a warning, and a source of fascination for financiers, journalists, and storytellers alike. The ripple effects of the scam were felt for decades. Investors became wary, regulatory systems strengthened, and the Indian stock market evolved into a more cautious, digitalized, and transparent ecosystem. Yet the psychological impact lingered. Markets are only as honest as the people who control them, and blind faith can be more dangerous than outright deception. Harshad Mehta had exposed a truth too uncomfortable to ignore. Charisma, audacity, and weak oversight could dismantle institutions designed to last centuries. The human stories continued to emerge. Families who had lost savings spoke anonymously to newspapers years later, recalling sleepless nights, ruined plans, and the betrayal of a system they believed in. Brokers who had cheered Harshad's rise confessed privately about the collective denial that allowed such fraud to thrive. Regulators admitted mistakes, and the financial world learned, slowly, that no matter how brilliant a market operator appears, trust must be earned, verified, and continuously audited. Even today, over 3 decades later, the Harshad Mehta scam serves as a case study in greed, ambition, and systemic vulnerability. Financial courses dissect his methods. Documentaries dramatize his rise and fall. Investors, both in India and abroad, look at the numbers, marvel at the audacity, and remember that markets are stories as much as they are equations. Harshad Mehta's life and scam illustrate that while money is measurable, trust and perception are infinitely more fragile. And as ScamSphere fans, if you thought this story was thrilling, dark, and unbelievable, the next story will push the boundaries even further. This was not an isolated incident. It was the blueprint for modern financial deception. A reminder that for every hero, there is a shadow waiting to exploit human systems. The legacy of Harshad Mehta is not just in the money lost, but in the lessons learned too late, the reforms forced by crisis, and the haunting realization that sometimes the smartest person in the room is also the most dangerous.